Hi, I'm Claire Christian from RedDoor Press, and I'm here in conversation with Stuart Condie, author of the Uganda Sails Wednesday. This is set aboard the SS Uganda, and it's the story of Heather Fontwell as she travels from London in the UK with her son Johnny to see her husband William in Africa. As the story unfolds, we learn why, and Stuart's going to chat a little bit about that with us. First of all, Stuart's going to give us a bit of a reading from the book.
Her letters are quite different, very long and all-embracing, as though the effort involved had exhausted the writer's energy, and some time would have to elapse before another letter was possible. The drawings enclosed from Johnny are usually worth the wait, though. The stick people now have faces, clothes and names, though the last one only included Johnny, his mum and one of his friends from down the street, his father absent. I'm standing on the veranda overlooking the grass and bushy borders leading towards the distant hills. This morning there's a nagging breeze across my cheek, and the green bays of the tea terraces ripples up and down over the rising ground with a faint sighing sound. On the horizon the hills are misty and dark. Above them bulbous clouds are gathering their rain-filled skirts for a likely downpour. The sun is a pale yellow veiled by the clouds, but strong enough to begin burning the moisture off the ground. I glance at my watch, showing 8:30, then wipe the sheen of moisture from my forehead with a fresh handkerchief, though I know the sweat will only reappear later. My wife is right about one thing, though. The telex certainly has come as a surprise. This is the first time that Heather has expressed the remotest desire to come to Africa, and she's usually dead against boarding school for Johnny. "Good morning, William," comes a voice from behind, making me start. I turn around, and there is Dorothea, one arm up high, hanging on the painted white door frame to the veranda. She grins, then drops her arm as she walks slowly over to me in that flowing movement she has, her legs striding purposefully. Dorothea has the shiny coffee-colour skin of a mixed-race woman, her hair tumbling straight down to her shoulders. She said her grandfather had worked on the Kenyan railway. Dorothea turns round as she's leaving with the ledger. "Why did you say reconsider?" I've forgotten that Dorothea keeps all the telex copies. There's a pause while I tap my fountain pen on the blotter. "I don't know what we'll do with Johnny." "Yes, I see," she says, nodding to an inaudible tune. "I can help if you want," she continues, "but now I have to get to the market before it closes." "Enjoy your weekend," I call to her as she moves around the office like a sound wave. I hear her picking up her belongings from the lounge, then clacking the veranda door behind her. The telex draft stares up at me from the desk. "My dear Heather, please reconsider Kenya journey if not yet booked. Love, William." I screw it into a ball and throw it into the bin. In the silence that follows, I wonder if Heather ever feels as lonely as I do. Of course I love her dearly, but sometimes I feel I don't know her any better than when we were first married. Our enforced separation hasn't helped either. But then there are days here where my unhappiness is swallowed up by the vastness of Africa.
Super. Okay, so that gives us a little bit of a feel for the book, but I wonder if you could tell us, Stuart, without spoilers, a little bit more of the story. Give us a bit of an overview of the book.
Okay, so maybe I'll use the excellent cover to the book.
Good.
So just in summary, here is Heather and her son Johnny in London where they live, and you can't see William, but he's up here with his tea plantations in Kenya with the tea bushes around the outside. So after an incident at the school nursery, Johnny's school nursery, she then decides somewhat in a rush to take the ship, the Uganda, on the long sea journey to William's tea plantation in Kenya. So it's a story about a journey which becomes increasingly fraught and more challenges for Heather to face.
Okay. Well, on that note, you referenced there's a couple of things that I'd like to ask you about Heather. She does face some challenges. I'll ask you about that in a second, but the first thing I wanted to say was one of the early reviews mentioned how well you write from Heather's point of view, from a woman's point of view. Did you find it difficult? Did you have to do a lot of research? Did you rely on your wife? How did you find that?
Yeah, no, it's quite challenging to write from a woman's viewpoint, well, for me anyhow, rather than a man's, I suppose. But so what I had to do was to really immerse myself in what life would have been like for Heather in 1960 at that particular time. So I had to do a lot of research, such as this is about, in this book it talks about what the lives of perfect wives were in the 1950s. So I really wanted to sort of get into, what the pressures were to conform and so forth. But most of all, I think I thought more about my mother and the kind of career she had and the things she could do and she couldn't do. So she was born around about roughly the same time as Heather, and so it was really getting the context right. Yeah,
because actually the character that you've made in Heather is not a perfect wife, probably in the sense of that book, is she? Because she's much more independent, and sort of she comes across as quite strong-minded and perhaps difficult on occasion. So I think that probably leads in a little bit to my other question about Heather, which was why, she does face a lot of resistance on board the ship. I guess a lot of people are travelling as families or as couples, and she's not. Is that, for me, that felt really, I thought it was really awful the way she was treated, but I guess that is how it would have been.
Yeah, I think women on their own were treated with a lot of suspicion in the 1950s, 1960, and so the obvious question, everyone was looking at her and thinking, what's a good-looking woman doing on her own, and where's her husband, and why is she doing this without her husband? So that was one thing. The second thing was the staff on the ship probably suspected she wasn't going to give them much in the way of tips.
Yes.
So they were a bit sniffy about her as well. And then thirdly, the officers thought she was far too clever, and all the observations she was making, they didn't really like.
She asks a lot of questions, doesn't she?
She asks a lot of questions, makes a lot of observations, and makes them feel a bit uneasy.
Well, I think the other thing that really struck me about the book when I first read it in its manuscript form was the sense of time and place. I felt like we were there in the 60s, and you've touched upon that with the research you've done, but I guess, is there anything else that you can say about how you managed to get that feel?
I read a lot of books that came out in 1959, 1960, that sort of period, just to try and get a feel for the age, the things that people were interested in. If you know what they were reading, you will get, I think, a spirit of the age to some degree. And then, of course, for the ship, I have this excellent Bible here.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, of course, it must have helped that the ship is an actual ship.
Yeah.
And that sort of leads me to another question, which was what sort of inspired you? And obviously, you just came across you were on it. I believe, this ship.
Yeah. So it all started when I worked on the Uganda as a kind of a gap year job in 1975 for 2 months between school and university. So I worked as a school office assistant. It was really that period that wanted me to write about the ship, and then I started writing about roughly based on my experiences in 1975, and I realised I needed a backstory. I realised there was a backstory about Heather that I was missing, so I had to put all that to one side and write the backstory, which is the book in front of us today.
And how long did, I don't think I've asked you this before, how long did it take you to write?
Well, I produced the first draft very, very quickly. It took me about a year, but then the whole editing, trying to find an agent, all that took probably 3 or 4 years. So and then another year, I guess, from when we first had conversations to production of the book.
So quite a long process.
So quite a long process, yeah.
Does tend to be, doesn't it? Anyway, but so going back to the actual writing of the book, then, is there a part that you really enjoyed writing the most? As sort of a scene that you really liked?
I really like Malta.
Oh, right.
Because it's sort of you're finally off the ship after a long period in the Atlantic and part of the Med, and you're now somewhere. And like the other places featured in the book, it's I call it the fag end of the colonial past. So this is Malta when it was a British colony before it became independent. Same with Kenya, and there's a bit of fun in it. There's a bit of humour in it. There's the bit set in the 2 cathedrals. I know it's just a nice mix of different scenes in it, which appeal to me.
That's true, actually, because you do get a feeling of almost cabin fever.
Yeah.
Because you are on the ship all the time, and you're right. It's and it gives you a bit more, as an author, I guess, a bit more scope to kind of to develop things a little bit. So, what about the difference between? I mean, obviously, this started as a short story. What about the difference between writing a short story, which I think you've done quite a few of, and then going the whole hog to create a full-length novel?
Well, they're very different processes. So, I mean, obviously, a novel takes you a very long time to write, although the speed of writing, as I kind of hinted at earlier, the speed of getting out the first draft, you get an awful lot of words out fairly quickly, so you can get 100, 120,000 words out of the door. Right, it takes you a year, but per 1,000 words, that's fairly fast, whereas a short story is something is very constrained. It's in a box. If you're entering a competition for 2,000 words or 3,000 words, whatever it is, that's the box. That's the limit. You want to say something, or you want to capture a moment or capture an event or a change or something, but you've immediately got this constraint. And also, there's a novel very definitely has a structure to it. And a short story, there's a beginning and there's an end, but it's much more difficult to write because it's difficult to get the structure sort of conveyed to the reader within this constraint. I find it. I mean, you can do it fast. You can write a first draft fast, but there's a good chance that it's rubbish and I just have to write another one. Going
on that, did you have to change a lot? Were your first readers brutal, or?
They were quite helpful. They told me some things. I said, "What don't you like? What don't you like about it?" And the things they said, I could take action on, and they were right. There were some things that were too long, and but the structure of it, I was still left feeling that the structure of it wasn't quite right, even after they read it. And it took me a while. I kept on trying to sort of address it and change this, that, and the other. I did an editing of it, but an editing at a lower level than was actually required. Right. I needed a higher level, essentially what you did, really, as part of the structural edit. I needed that, and I didn't quite get it from my readers.
So, because the ship is a real ship, and it has had a long life, hasn't it? You've got another couple of books that you're developing from it. So do you want to tell us a bit more about how the ship's life and how that fits with your writing?
Okay, so the ship had 3 main periods in its existence. One was as a passenger cargo liner for the British colonies in East Africa. It was built shortly after the end of the Second World War because a lot of merchant shipping got sunk or damaged, and it was built for that purpose. Unfortunately, that whole world of people travelling by ship and cargo being sent by ship, that whole world was turned topsy-turvy by, amongst other things, air travel. So basically, why would you take 10 days to go to East Africa when you can fly there in one?
Yeah.
And there was a price. I mean, you could travel by plane in 1960, but it was a very torturous process and quite expensive. And it wasn't until 1970 that changed quite a lot. So, and all the colonies in East Africa gained their independence, and they didn't particularly want ties with Britain any more than ties with anywhere else. So Britain's kind of unique position disappeared. The Uganda was converted into a school's cruise ship in 1968 because that was already an established market that P&O had, but the ships were elderly and didn't meet fire regulations, so they converted the Uganda, found another troop ship, and they were the two new ships in the 1960s.
And that was as part of P&O, was it?
Yeah, P&O took over British India in around about that time, let's say. I can't remember the exact date. But and it then had a very successful period as a school's cruise ship, really right up until the time until it was requisitioned by the MOD as a hospital ship for the Falklands conflict, which was in 1982. So that then started its sort of Falklands period. So then had a minor conversion, got sent down to the Falklands, acted as a hospital ship. When the conflict ended, it then acted as a troop ship from Ascension Island to the Falkland Islands, and it did that for best part of a year as well. At the end of which it was in a fairly bad state, and it was laid up in the Fowl and was then scrapped. But there were these three distinct periods, so there will be three books to fit these three periods. So the first is the one we've been talking about. The second will show the ship in the school's cruise element, and then the last one will have bits of the Falklands conflict in it.
But the Fontwell family will remain central.
The Fontwell family will, they carry on through, and some other characters as well. Some other characters survive from book one, sort of carry on through, so the storyline carries on.
Okay, great. Well, I think what we should do is, should we finish off with that second reading? Because I think that gives a really good flavour of the book without giving anything away.
Yes.
Brings in a lot of elements.
So this is sort of fairly near the beginning of chapter 6, 26th of March 1960, and the ship is in the Gulf of Cadiz. So up on boat deck there was an easterly wind blowing warm air across from the Iberian Peninsula. Instead of the sound of the occasional passenger, there was now constant chatter as chairs were brought out and drinks requested. The Indian deck crew had just finished applying a brown stain to the teak railings, leaving warning signs not to touch, and were now polishing brass fittings around the deck doors and stowing away the tarpaulin covers from the tourist and first-class swimming pools. There were hose pipes filling the two pools, and a couple of deckhands were splashing around inside, cleaning the blue sides of residue from the previous voyage and removing any debris in a net. Johnny made a fuss about wanting to go in, even though he couldn't swim, so Heather promised to look for a buoyancy aid of some sort. Heather was lying in a deck chair wondering what to do next when she spotted D'Souza and another steward coming out of the doorway marked crew only, which led to their quarters at the stern of the ship. She waved at them as they passed, and D'Souza came over. "I spoke to Hancock just after breakfast, and he said it was all a misunderstanding, and you could stay as my steward after all," she said, touching the sleeve of his white jacket. "Very good, madam," replied D'Souza, beaming. "And how is Master Johnny today?" he added, turning to her son. "He's cross as he hasn't got a bathing ring," replied Heather, without waiting for Johnny to reply. The two Goanies spoke to each other in their language. Then D'Souza said to Heather, "There's a bathing ring and some water wings in storage. I'll look for them." he walked back to the crew area, skirting the cargo hatches and derricks while the other steward waited. "Here we are," said D'Souza on his return moments later. He presented Johnny with 2 bright blue water wings and a ring with one half white and the other red. Now Johnny was happy with his wings and ring. Heather could watch him and read her magazines at the same time. But instead she found herself thinking about the day when she and Johnny had made an impromptu visit to her sister in Beckenham. She'd gone ostensibly to ask for Marjorie's approval, or at least for her understanding for the trip. Instead, she'd found her sister in tears about her newly diagnosed inability to have children, and Marjorie was upset, but so upset that she was quite naturally unable to think of or talk about anything else. Now Heather had to reflect on how she could assist Marjorie, and hopefully her sister would reciprocate so they could help each other as they'd always done before. But first she'd have to talk to her sister about when her father was ill. Then she'd have to confess about Gerald. Heather laid aside her magazines and practiced her breathing exercises again to try and quell her inner anxiety, then sat up and waved at Johnny. Her son was grasping the edge of the pool with his water wings on his upper arms and his ring presumably around his waist. "Watch me," he said. Heather smiled, but her mind was elsewhere. On balance, Heather thought she would write to Marjorie, but it would need careful wording. "Drink, madam?" asked one of the stewards, a younger man with smooth dark skin and sleeked back hair. Heather asked Johnny what he wanted, then ordered a lemonade and a gin and tonic. "Shall I read you a story?" Heather asked Johnny. He nodded, and she crouched down under her chair to retrieve the book from her beach bag, then skimmed down the contents list till she found something suitable for a 5-year-old. "The Owl and the Pussycat," she said, moving to sit beside him on the edge of the pool. "The Owl and the Pussycat went to sea in a beautiful pea-green boat. They took some honey and plenty of money wrapped up in a £5 note. At the end, Johnny clapped his hands and went off for another paddle. Their drinks arrived, and Heather leaned back and wrote 'Johnny likes' against the poem. She sensed someone looking at her and glanced up. It was Mr. and Mrs. Carruthers, who'd arrived unnoticed by Heather and were now sitting in chairs against the wall of the first-class pool. He's an ugly man, she thought, with thinning hair and pock-marked skin, heavily built, unlike his gaunt wife with her 2 prominent cheekbones. They both looked quickly away, the wife returning to her book, while he gazed out to sea, frowning. "Again," said Johnny, who got out of the pool via the steps and was dripping beside her. She sat him next to her, then repeated Edward Lear's nonsense poem. "That's us, Johnny. We've gone to sea," she said, opening her arms out wide and flat. "And this is our beautiful green boat." "Nah," said Johnny. Heather wrote, "Us en route to Kenya," next to the first verse.
That's great. I think that gives us a real insight and a bit of a flavour of the book. You'll obviously have to get yourself a copy if you want to find out more. But also, if you want to find out more, have a look at our website, which is reddoorpress.co.uk, or visit Stuart's website, which is stuartcondie.uk. Thank you very much, Stuart.
Thank you.